Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Going to start off with the most recent USA Today Suffolk poll that finds 2/3 of the people they surveyed believe Joe Biden has the right experience to be president. And now that's not really shocking. That's not surprising. The flip side of it, just 37% of the people polled believe the guy who's currently president has the right experience to be president. That, I got to tell you, not really a good sign. Not a good sign for the Donald at all. And look, he's gotten himself into this mess. This is one of those moments where you go, failure of leadership at every step of the way. Now, talking about positive leadership, today the Republicans here in the state of Pennsylvania losing their mind. The Commonwealth Foundation sent out emails just, the fascist state, the Supreme Court doesn't believe in the rule of law, because the Supreme Court here in Pennsylvania sided with Governor Wolf in not allowing the Republican legislature to force an end to the things that he is doing to combat the COVID virus. And today the administration today signed a new order requiring people to wear masks whenever they leave the house. So this means tomorrow when I leave, I guess I'm going to have to wear it every time out of the house now. Before it was just when you went into stores and you were around groups of people. This is much more all encompassing. And look, when you see the spiking going on, when you see the numbers going up, something's got to be done. And there's a surge going on, and now we find out that Health and Human Services, this Admiral Brett Gayor, he is going to do what he's calling surge testing. They're going to surge test people under 35 in some places, and then they're going to, wait for it, they're going to put in a plan to identify, quarantine, and trace. Think about that for a second. They're going to identify, they're going to quarantine, and they're going to trace. Exactly what people have been saying, I don't know, from the beginning of this is what we should have been doing. It's nice to know that months later they're finally getting around to it. And I guess it had to happen in the South, where the Republican stronghold is. It had to happen to them before they wised up. And it's again another one of those moments where you go, do we all have to learn things the hard way? Now, Trump again today claims that the virus is just going to disappear. It's just going to go away on a day when we saw a record 40,000 new infections. It's just going to magically go away. Now, look, possibly could if we were to do the right things and stay away from large crowds. And I know the guy in Texas had the not clubs ain't the problem, y'all. Yeah, kind of is. Large gatherings of people, kind of the problem right now. Maybe steer a little clear. Because look, when you're crammed into a nightclub, and I've spent a lot of time in bars, there's not 6 feet around you. There's sometimes not 6 inches around you. So this is another one of those moments where failure of leadership, not surprising that the number of people polled don't believe he's qualified to be president or has the right experience. The thing that gets me, though, is this is an opportunity for him. I mean, he's really in the tank polling-wise. This is an opportunity for him to, come out and take some decisive action. Yesterday, he tweeted out that he looks like the Lone Ranger when he puts on a mask, because he's now in favor of masks, which is kind of weird. And I've been seeing a bunch of for sale Trump 2020 masks, which is, again, really freaking weird. But okay, whatever it takes to get, Billy Joe Bob and the Karens to put on a mask, I'm all for it. Slap whatever you want on the front of it. Just cover up your nose. But here's the other part of this. As we begin to close some things down, and a number of states are closing bars and restaurants down again, it's going to continue to happen. What's it doing to our economy? And this, again, is another one of those moments where if he were to come out with very strong leadership and say, look, we're going to make sure nobody goes bankrupt. We're going to make sure no working person loses their home. We're going to make sure that we help businesses and that they're able to keep people on the payrolls, and we're going to all get through this together. Might have to tighten our belt a little bit, but we're all going to make it through, and nobody's going to slip through the cracks. He could do that. He's not, but he could. And, he was interviewed on Fox Business today. And that's where he said that the virus is just going to disappear. In the same interview, he said that, he supports more stimulus payments. Didn't say what that looks like. Now, Republicans have lost their minds about the $600 federal addition to unemployment that has really kept our economy from collapsing. Understand, that one thing has kept our economy from absolute collapse. And it ends here at the end of this month. And you have to ask, what then? When all of those workers, then go back to getting, half of their wages, what's that going to mean for the future? Now, what we know is right now they say the official unemployment rate in May is over 13%. And a lot of those jobs, evidently, they're not coming back. A lot of those jobs, there's no chance of them coming back. So what are you going to do to move them forward? What are you going to do to help them? Because as soon as the extra $600 goes away, that lifeline goes away. And then you end up with, mass foreclosures. You end up with people being evicted from their homes. You end up with all of the societal ills that come with mass financial problems. And this administration doesn't seem all that concerned or in any real urgent fashion of allaying the fears of many working people who are looking at the end of this month going, what am I going to do? Now, I've said from the beginning they should pass some type of guaranteed minimum income across the board, like they did with the $1,200. That should have happened not just in March, but it should have happened in April and in May and in June. It should have happened every month to ensure that people can stay home, that people can continue to pay their bills, and can continue to, exist. Republicans have been dead set against that. Instead, they've been going, hey, let's give corporate money to our friends, which they have done, pretty mightily. I'm still waiting to find out what happened with that $500 billion slush fund. But here again, we'll find that out in the years ahead, probably. We find out today, though, that Congress has passed an extension to the Paycheck Protection Program, which was supposed to be that thing that was going to help people stay on the payroll, continue to collect their wages, and continue to stay out with their health care and their pensions and their benefits, and continue some stability. And we're going to do this through the employers because, we've got really wonderful employers. Turns out not a lot did it. In fact, there's of this, I guess it was, $600 billion is what the Treasury Department had calculated, along with the Small Business Administration, that they would need. There's still, I guess, $130 billion left in this fund that they've now extended the window to go and apply for these loans and go for all this stuff with the goal of keeping people on the payroll, keeping people collecting a paycheck, keeping people attached to their employer. Again, all the problems we've seen with this plan of the connected getting to the front of the line, the small businesses being left out. It's frustrating. And maybe with the new one, maybe with this extension, maybe we do it a little fairer, maybe a little more equitable. maybe a little more streamlined. Maybe now that we've had a little time and we should have been working all of this time and someone should have been doing something all of this time, maybe we figure out how, well, it isn't a giant, S storm. Just kind of a thought. Now, some other good news coming out of Congress today. The Democratic House passed a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. About damn time. Understand it's probably going to get, crushed in the Senate because, the reality is McConnell has no interest in moving something like this forward, especially with that kind of money. But here, we need somewhere in the range of $4.5 trillion to upgrade our infrastructure just to passing, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. $1.5 trillion is a good start. And you know what it would do? It might actually help. Oh, I don't know. It might actually help create some of the jobs that we've lost and transition people into other employment and, move us into the 21st century. Just kind of a thought. They say it's going to help fix some roads and bridges. It's going to upgrade our transit systems, expand interstate railways and dredge harbors, ports and channels. So we're going to do more water stuff. It passed largely by a party line vote, 233 to 188. Not surprising. As of now, as of the reports that I've seen, McConnell has not scheduled any debate time, and it doesn't appear anything's coming. So don't hold your breath. But this is one of those moments. This is where we talk about, with the economy where it's at, with the number of people unemployed, with the number of jobs that have been lost, isn't this the perfect time to do big things? I mean, I say this every time we have a downturn. This isn't new. The 15 years I've been doing this show, I say this every time there's a recession. We could do really big things. We could finally borrow money at really low interest rates, and we can invest in the things that our grandchildren will go, hey, that was really a good thing you built for us. Thanks a lot. Kind of like we've looked back at and what was done during the FDR era, what was done during the Truman era, what was done during the Eisenhower era, the interstate highway system. You think that could be done today? We can't seem to get a damn pothole filled with the divide and the partisanship of, well, you're going to get credit for it. All of you take credit for it. How about we do that? But beyond just the roads and the bridges and that stuff, we need broadband access. We need to upgrade, and we need to be the leader in this because, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with our China expert who was saying, the new 5G technology, if the Chinese control it, they're going to control the world. There's no question about it. And do you feel comfortable with the idea that you're going to be driving in a self-driving car on an internet base on a Wi-Fi that's controlled by China? Are you really going to be comfortable with that? I know that I'm not. But like I said, the hope here is that we get something moving. We get Congress to pass another stimulus. Like I said, I think some guaranteed minimum income from now until the end of the year, or actually till next spring, because I'm really worried about post-Christmas, which the economy normally dips. That's what I'm worried for. And if we can bail out huge corporations, if we can hand out money to corporate donors, we can help the average working person. So for me, the idea of ensuring that people have the ability to stay in their homes, feed their families, keep their health insurance, those are the goals. And I just don't see anything policy-wise coming out of this administration. All I see is chaos. And chaos is what we will talk about in the next segment, as our good friend Sarah Kendzior is going to be here to share some thoughts on, is the bounty story, as Donald Trump says, a giant hoax? Or is there something real to it? What's it mean for us around the world? Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Sarah Kendzior will be here to share some thoughts. Right back. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1929. That was the day 1,800 streetcar drivers and motormen walked off the job at New Orleans Public Service. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees, Division 194, had been in contract negotiations for months. They demanded higher wages, a closed shop, and an end to arbitrary discharges. The company was looking to bust the Amalgamated with the creation of a company union. For the first few days, the strike was quiet. But then, on July 5th, the company brought in strikebreakers. 10,000 union members and their supporters gathered to stop scab service. The company attempted to run a lone streetcar down Canal Street. Immediately, it was pelted with bricks and stones. The scab driver bailed. Another 4 cars attempted to leave the car barn. Pitched battles raged for hours with police and scabs. 2 union men were shot and killed by scabs, and hundreds more injured. Trade unions throughout the city threatened a general strike. The strike raged on for 2 months. Throughout the summer, trolleys were burned to the ground, tracks destroyed, switches cemented in place. As the weeks wore on, conditions became more desperate. That's when Clovis and Beanie Martin, former Division 194 conductors, decided to help out. They had since left public transit to open the Martin Brothers coffee stand and restaurant. They declared to their former union brothers, quote, "We are with you, heart and soul. We are with you till hell freezes over." They offered free supersized sandwiches for the poor boys. The strikers would eventually win some of their demands. The sandwiches would become a standard in New Orleans cuisine, better known as the po' boy. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some interesting news coming out of Russia. It turns out that the voters evidently overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment to allow Vladimir Putin to stay in office or in power until 2036. Evidently, he was supposed to be out in 2024, but this overwhelming vote, which some people are questioning, are going to give him the ability to stay until 2036, which would make him, about 86 years old? Something like that. Yeah, scary times. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, not just Putin's, lifetime appointment there, but also is it a hoax? Is it real? Was he briefed? Wasn't he briefed on this bounty story? I've asked our good friend Sarah Kenzio to come talk with us. Sarah is the author of the best-selling book, Hiding in Plain Sight. Also, the other bestseller, The View from Flyover Country. She's also the host of the wonderful podcast, Gaslit Nation. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's start with Putin. 2036, he'll still be in office.
Yeah, well, that was the plan. I mean, when he took office on New Year's Eve in 1999, it wasn't with the intent of leaving. It was with the intent of dismantling, fledgling democratic institutions in Russia, creating a greater surveillance state that existed, getting revenge for the dissolution of the Soviet Union, enhancing his own power, making it a mafia state. 2006 was really the year, I think, that he began to clinch that power, and it became steadily worse over the next 14 years. A lot of naivete on the part of the West. You had George Bush, looking into his eyes and seeing his alleged soul. You had Obama laughing off the threat during the 2012 debate and then doing nothing to stop it during his second term in office, thus leading us into our current situation with Trump, the Kremlin asset. So, yeah, I hope Americans take away from this what I've been saying for a long time, which is once an autocrat gets into office, it is very hard to get them out, and they will rewrite law so that they stay there forever. And so that's the door that we have already opened up here in the U.S.
So you're saying that the cautionary tale is this is something Trump would aspire to.
Oh, absolutely. And he's got lots of backers to help him do it. And if it's not Trump, it will be a selected successor. And I don't mean selected by the American people. in a free and fair election. I mean, an appointee, possibly Ivanka, possibly, some sort of, dynastic arrangement, or just a slicker version of Trump who serves the same interests, both in the U.S. and abroad, because he has dismantled these institutions of accountability, institutions of democratic stability, regardless of what his particular role as an individual is in it. That damage has been done.
Yeah, and now we see this story come out that this Russian spy unit, probably Putin, paid the Taliban to put a bounty on the head of U.S. soldiers. Trump's response today, on the day that this news breaks that Putin is basically in for life, is that it's fake news. It's all a hoax.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt it's all a hoax, but this strategy of selectively leaking things that U.S. intelligence and allegedly parts of Congress have known about for a year, that have been endangering our military, that certainly John Bolton knew all about, but instead decided to pursue a book deal. That's grotesque in his own right. My guess is that he knew. Perhaps he wasn't briefed, because that's not where Trump gets the information that he needs to know. He gets it from his mafia associates. He gets it from people like Ivanka and Kushner, who get it from, whoever they need to know in government, whether it's about rigging an election here or making a kleptocratic financial arrangement abroad, or, getting involved in some sort of military incursion that they should not be doing. There's all sorts of things. I kind of believe Trump if he says he's not pouring through briefs and reading papers. He doesn't do that in part because he doesn't care. Like, he doesn't need to know. He just wants to know the very basics. And he's actually not unique in that way. Like George W. Bush was that way. But also, he's a lifelong mafia operator. And so I think the way his thought process works is, I don't want to know this. Like, that's for the lawyers to know. That's for my lackeys to know, so that if I am ever brought into court, I can just, honest to God, say, I wasn't aware of that. And there'll be no proof that I ever was aware of that. They do a lot of things in this kind of coded, calibrated way. Michael Cohen discussed that in his testimony in February 2019. That said, it doesn't make it any less horrific. The groundwork was already laid. Russia was involved in U.S. meetings with the Taliban in fall 2019. Like, this is another one of those old stories that, was horrific to start out with, and just has another layer.
Yeah, and to highlight that, I've been reading through John Bolton's book. The publisher sent it. I didn't buy it. I would never buy it. But, as I'm reading through it, it basically just confirms everything that we've always known. All of the things that we suspected, it just confirms that. And to highlight your point, Trump doesn't read the briefings. He mostly gets it from Fox News, which is even more scarier than with mob associates.
Yeah, he gets it from Fox, and people need to recognize that Fox is not just a propaganda outlet for the GOP, to spread culture war materials and things like that. It's a way of relaying information to Trump, and there are people that are directly implicated. Like Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, only had 3 clients, and one of them was Sean Hannity. And so people like Sean Hannity have been involved in the policymaking of this administration, and also in the certainly in the cover-ups of the crimes, especially related to the Mueller report, possibly in the crimes themselves. That extends to other personalities who have been at Fox News. So it's a weapon that was created intentionally to protect a president like Trump. I mean, and that's not me speculating. That's what Roger Ailes admitted. It was created in part after Watergate, so that if there were ever a Republican president that was being investigated for a criminal act, they would have their own guaranteed propaganda apparatus there to defend them. And if Fox had existed during Nixon's time, it's possible that Nixon would have never been, seriously threatened with impeachment, and that there wouldn't have been bipartisan agreement to go forth with that.
Yeah, they have their spin machine. But, it's this weird world because, we're in this globally we're in chaos. I mean, the country's in chaos, but globally as well. And Der Spiegel had what I thought was an excellent cover on their magazine a couple of weeks ago with the title "Fire Devil: A President Burns Down His Own Country." A picture of Trump basically sitting at the Resolute desk with a match as the country behind him burns. And this is kind of where we are, not just as a country, but globally, because we see today that Hong Kong, basically, the Chinese government has imposed a no protest law that they're just going to lock people up for basically being traitors for protesting.
Hello?
I think we lost her.
Wait, I'm here.
I think but my question is I look at this and while we're going through all of this kind of spin around Trump and his incompetence, there's real serious consequence out there.
Oh yeah, I mean globally, the U.S. has been part of a downward trend for about 6 years. And with Hong Kong, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see all of those months of protest come to this, and and the protesters weren't naive. Like they knew that this could happen, but to see it borne out in reality, and other things in China, the continued abuse of Uyghurs in concentration camps, being forcibly sterilized, all these other things. And on top of that, you have coronavirus. And, one of the things that's sort of striking to me about all the horrors of coronavirus is, we get a lot of stories about, how does the virus work and do we have immunity and these sort of scientific things. But basic things are now gone. Like, the ability of Americans to leave the country is basically gone. We're all banned at the border, certainly of the EU, and at most places, because we're thought of as a diseased population. The border to Canada and I believe Mexico, they're closed as well. They've stopped making passports, which is just incredible to me, because they're saying, oh, it's fine, let's all open up, let's go out. Meanwhile, Americans can't get passports even if they're not going to travel anywhere. You can only do it if it's some sort of, you can prove it's a dire emergency. Even then, you might not get it for months. And just to not have that as a form of identification and as something that you would need to travel, that's a sign of dictatorship. That is what dictatorships do when they're about to consolidate, when they're about to commit acts of mass violence that are going to cause a refugee crisis. So that's sort of one of those things going under the radar that's been alarming to me. I think we have a lot of countries around the world that are on the brink of having a refugee crisis, and they're not the ones that people usually think of, when they think of Syria or Yemen or something like that. They're Western nations that are turning from democracies into autocracies that are brutalizing large segments of the population, that have, no job opportunities, no economic relief. I think there would be a lot more mobility if we weren't all trapped in here. And as this plays out over the next 6 to 12 months, especially if the election goes with Trump seizing total control, I don't know what exactly is going to go on, but people should see that. They should see that as a serious warning sign, I think.
Yeah, no, because one of the questions I was going to ask is, with China taking over Hong Kong and imposing this kind of, really draconian law, are we seeing kind of a realigning of the world in returning to a Cold War stance of basically choosing sides, and with us left with no side?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation with China, because China is an autocratic state, but weirdly, the thing that's weird about it is that the Republicans actually seem to dislike this, whereas in most cases, whether it's Russia or Saudi Arabia or Israel, they like it when there's a brutal autocratic leader. They cheer for it. They try to align with it. With China, they've become very critical, and they're bringing up things that I know they, couldn't care less about, like the plight of the Uyghurs, which has been going on for decades. It's obviously gotten much worse in the last 5 years, but they suddenly are bringing this up. There's a sort of bipartisan alignment. I don't trust it at all. I wish it was rooted in genuine concern for human rights and for, the democratic process. But we know the Republicans don't care about those things here. They're actively trying to stomp them out. The Democrats, at least in the leadership, have been largely complacent, have been, signing on to Trump's bills to fund the Republicans to carry out this kind of brutal activity, fund the Trump administration to, commit its treasury heist. So whatever's going on, I don't exactly, grasp what it is. I don't think it's based on any kind of moral foundation. It is some sort of new alignment. We previously had, the axis of autocracies with, U.S., Russia, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, a few others, Brexit, UK with Boris Johnson. And China was kind of, on its own, making deals, sort of stuck in the middle, a big rival. So that might be part of it, is they want to stomp out a rival. But, I'm sorry, I can't buy it when Marco Rubio is going on about human rights violations, or Trump,
Right.
I mean, it's just too much. It's like listening to Kushner talk about criminal justice reform. I'm like, yeah, okay. But anyway.
But so you brought up Kushner. Do you buy the Trump thing today that, he's tired of the woke, what? And, because I saw it as, now they're going to really start to crack down and they're going full on racist from this point forward.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're already full-on racist. And I can tell you what Kushner was doing. I actually wrote about this in my book, In Hiding in Plain Sight, which is Kushner wants there to be no consequences for white-collar crime. He has said this fairly explicitly. I quote him at length because his father was a white-collar criminal who committed, a lot of crimes, fraud and blackmail and, all sorts of things. And Kushner thought, basically, my father should not go to jail because we are special people. We don't, we're never going to be treated the way that mere average people are because, we're the Kushners and we're above it all and we have our own set of laws. And that's really how he thinks of the world. And he thought it was just so unjust that this could possibly happen to a person like him. And so that's been the impetus of anything that he calls criminal justice reform. It has nothing to do with racial justice. It has nothing to do, with reducing sentences for, somebody, like a poor person who commits a very minor crime and serves a lot of time or is, held without, having their rights read. He doesn't care about any of that. It's just protecting himself and friends because they are white-collar criminals. He's been committing crimes in office. And I think they also, cynically are trying to reach out and say, oh, yeah, us, we really want to help out the black folks of America. We care so much, and that's why we stocked our administration with white supremacist Nazis. I mean, I don't think black voters or black people in general are going to fall for this because, the evidence is right there. Trump's also out saying, if you touch a Confederate statue, we're going to send in the military to, go shoot you. So I think that latter message hits home, and I don't think that Kushner cares at all about racial justice. I mean, Kushner and Ivanka, used to go to a rabbi who taught them that were fear sheets, that they weren't human, that they were like monkeys. I mean, that is what they believe. And they're just as racist as Jeff Sessions, Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, all these other more, I guess, famous for their racism type racists and the white supremacists. In the White House, it's a white supremacist White House. That's what it is. I can't really think of too many exceptions to that rule.
Yeah, but so you don't buy into that there's a rift between Kush and Donald Trump.
I mean, maybe in terms of who gets to date Ivanka, but not really beyond that. Sorry. But, seriously, that's there. That's just kind of hanging in the background.
Oh, no, that's not hanging in the background. That's one of the creepiest things he's ever said. If she wasn't his daughter, he'd be dating her. That will never go out of my mind.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, and you would think that it would be something to, raise some alarm among all of our, upholders of moral values and family values that populate Congress and the media. But no, we're just going to pretend that that's a totally normal thing to say. We're all just going to, push that one away, never bring it up again, never bring up all those photos, never bring up Trump, allegedly raping a 13-year-old who looked a lot like Ivanka. We're just going to pretend that none of that is actually going on, apparently.
Or any of the Howard Stern tapes of him, going in to check out the talent during his Miss Teen USA pageants and all that. We're going to forget all that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's disgusting. Like, it's just, it's such a network of complicity, this nexus of crime, pedophile sex trafficking, obviously exemplified by Jeffrey Epstein, and these publicists in New York City who work to cover up all these guys' tracks. Like, almost all of them shared one publicist, Howard Rubenstein. At one point, Kushner, Trump, Epstein, I think Dershowitz, maybe Dershowitz. I don't want to say that because Dershowitz sues everybody, so I'm just going to leave him out. Also allegedly raping a Epstein victim. I mean, it's a serious problem, and it contributes, obviously, to the national security crisis that we've been experiencing, because we know that all of these actors are working with U.S. policy, U.S. intelligence, foreign affairs, all these things. So it's not like a gossip issue. It's a criminal issue, and it's also deeply perverse and sick and exploitative and should not be so rampant. I mean, just last week, George Nader, one of Trump's associates, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for pedophilia, for I believe, underage rape. And possession of child pornography. It's like, why is that such a common attribute of the people in his midst? It's like pedophilia and white supremacy and treason. Those are like, the holy or the unholy trinity of the Trump crime cohort.
I think that would be an interesting bumper sticker. Trump, treason, pedophilia, and jeez.
White supremacy.
There you go.
White supremacy.
You can't fit all that on one bumper sticker. We need a whole, a whole back of a trailer. But here's the thing. I still think, as much as the polls say that, Biden is so far ahead, I don't think so. I'm really worried about 125 days from today.
I mean, I'm very worried about it, but I do think, and I've always thought this, that in a free and fair election, Trump would lose. And at this point, given what they've done with coronavirus and unemployment and how much people are suffering and how much Trump has lied about this incredibly serious situation, I think that Biden would do pretty well in a free and fair election. And my worry is just that we're not going to have a free and fair election. And it's interesting to me that people are finally kind of overtly stating that 2016 was likely rigged. This is something we were warned about in advance, numerous by Hillary Clinton, by Harry Reid, many others. No one did anything about it. The FBI, the Obama administration just decided to roll the dice and see if we got a Kremlin asset in the White House, which we did. But there's now more, kind of blatant, blunt talk about that. And I wonder what that's about, that they're finally coming clean. And in addition to that, to the whole foreign interference and rigged machine aspect, you have domestic voter suppression, which is going to be worse because of new laws passed. You have Trump refusing to leave, which I think is a very likely possibility, even if Biden is overwhelmingly the winner, even if it's quite clear. And I think that they'll use the coronavirus crisis to, try to delegitimize the vote. If people have to vote by mail for health reasons, which is actually a safer way of voting than voting in person, I think that they're going to claim voter fraud because they're already laying that narrative out.
No, absolutely. And, they're suing the state of Pennsylvania over drop-off boxes. I mean, they're using their lawyers all around the country. Lastly, I wanted to get your thoughts on Bolton's book, which, like I said at the beginning, kind of just confirms what we knew. He's a petulant child who gets his news from Fox News, doesn't read the briefings, a whole bunch of stuff, is not fit for office in any way, stretch, or form. Thoughts on the book? I mean, I'm in this place where you should have testified. You should have, if you're really the patriot that you make yourself out to be, you should have come forth when it mattered. Although in his book, he does claim that he wasn't subpoenaed.
Yeah, I mean, he should have come forward, for the impeachment hearings. He should have come forward, early on in the administration, but he was too busy doing things like defunding the CDC or plotting war with Iran. He's an untrustworthy actor. Whenever there's a book that Trump says, oh my God, I don't want this to come out, so scandalous, it almost always has the same narrative, which is that Trump is incompetent. Not that he's malicious, not that he's tied to the mafia, not that he's committed crimes, but just, oh, he's incompetent, he's unqualified, he's a jackass, he's rude, things that are bad, but they're not things that you can be imprisoned for, and they're not necessarily even things that you can be. It's true of the book. This was true of the Bob Woodward book. And so the minute I saw Trump doing this whole thing of, oh, no, I can't possibly have John Bolton write this, I was like, okay, this is one of those, I'm going to cover crime with scandal. I'm going to cover malice with incompetence. Bolton's book might drive this home a little more in terms of just, how terrible a human being Trump is, but really, if you haven't learned that by now, 4 years into this administration and 40 years into Trump as a public figure, I don't know what's wrong with you. I don't know how your mind would possibly be swayed by John Bolton, of all people, an untrustworthy warmonger. So, yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's the book exists, and that's that, and, I'm not going to buy it, and I'm not going to read it.
When I'm done with it, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
That's
I'll
the
use
best.
it as a doorstop.
That's the best. And there's a good thing, good use for it. But Sarah, as always, I appreciate the thoughts. Good stuff.
Hey, thank you.
A doorstop. Hey, maybe not, but a bad idea. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Let's take a quick break. Right back.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1922. That was the day that railroad workers across the United States walked off the job. During World War I, the railroads had been nationalized by President Woodrow Wilson. Seen as a vital cog of the war machine, the railroads were to be kept running no matter what. Because they were essential to the war effort, this gave railroad workers leverage. They won the 8-hour workday and improved working conditions. But when the war ended, railroads went back under private control. The seat at the table with management quickly was pulled out from under labor. The private owners eliminated Sunday and holiday overtime pay. Then wages were slashed for many railroad workers. The railroad companies promised the Big Four unions that no further cuts were coming. These included the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, the Brotherhood of Firemen and Engineermen, the Order of Railroad Conductors, and the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. A strike vote was held across the industry. The Big Four voted not to strike, but the other unions decided to walk off the job. The response by the companies and the government was swift and brutal. A federal court issued an injunction against the strikers. They were prohibited from even talking about the strike to the press. Thousands of company gun thugs and National Guard troops were mobilized against the strikers. 10 workers were killed. With both guns and the courts lined up against them, the railroad workers did not stand much of a chance. The strike was defeated. The failed strike showed the importance of building workers' solidarity across job type if labor had any hope of standing up to the bosses. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I spent a little time on Facebook today watching one of the Facebook Live videos from Richmond, Virginia, as they were tearing down the statue of Stonewall Jackson, and it was one of these moments where I'm like, I can't believe that it's taken this long to get rid of that. I mean, these. And it's one of those things that I grew up with as a kid going, when we learned about the Civil War and we went to, when I was in 8th grade, we went to Washington and, we went to the battlefields and we went to Gettysburg and we did all of these things and talking about the Civil War. And, I remember at the time being a young kid going, explain to me how, you fight each other over an issue that, now we kind of take for granted, that you can't own people. And why is it that we're remembering the people who are on the wrong side of history? Why is it that we have monuments to them? And I remember just being dumbfounded that there were people who would dress up as these traitors and then reenact these battles. And it, even then, as a 13-year-old kid, I'm going, this seems kind of dumb. And all these years later, you still had all these monuments, and you still have all this history of treason. And I know I have people tell me, but Rick, it's the history of our country, and I agree. Yeah, it's the history of our country. Something that maybe we should not be glorifying. Maybe something we should be saying this was horrible. We did the Gettysburg tour. And had a really enthusiastic tour guide. And maybe it's just me, but we had this really, really enthusiastic tour guide who was just thrilled to rattle off the numbers of the people who died and the horrible deaths that they died. And he was just as upbeat. And there were people, the blood all over this field, ankle deep in blood, and people moaning for days. And when it rained, and he was just going off, and I'm going, these are like 4th grade kids that you're telling this stuff to. And, he's going, can you picture, this incredible battle? And my mind just kept going, can you imagine the hatred? Can you imagine the stench and the death? And, this isn't something to be remembered positively. And, I remember, having a conversation with the guy and going, I see it as a huge diplomatic problem. As a kid, I go, why didn't we just buy up all the slaves and then free them? That would have been a lot easier, wouldn't it? And then say, you can't do it anymore. You got your money. Use eminent domain if you had to. But no, we had to fight this war. And now we've rewritten history, because when I was a kid, you learned it was about slavery. It was about the South wanted to own people. They wanted to free labor. And now it's morphed into, well, it was really about states' rights. It wasn't about those people at all. It was about the principle. And I'm sorry, I don't buy that even a little bit. So I think it's good that Jackson's statue comes down. You want to put it in a museum somewhere where history belongs? Fine, not in a public park paid for by taxpayer dollars. Sorry, not going there. Now, Joe Biden jumped into the mix where he said that Columbus, Washington, and Jefferson statues should be protected. He said toppling the Christopher Columbus statue or the George Washington statue. I think that is something that the government has an opportunity and a responsibility to protect from happening. I don't want the Washington or the Jefferson statues torn down. I understand the arguments against Jefferson. I understand that. Washington was the founder of our country. I mean, you can have the conversation around, what they did. And I think that's important. And I struggle with this whole, naming places and things after people of the past, because it dredges up the past. And maybe in a good way, we have these conversations. I don't know. But we're in this weird moment where I think a lot of us want to move forward. But I don't think we can go forward until you deal with those things of the past. And the Confederate monuments are part of that. I don't think you can move forward as a country and heal as a country until you put that behind us. I know people who believe that we're going to refight the same battles. In fact, one of the first people I met when I moved to central Pennsylvania was a guy, a neighbor. Had a conversation with him. He had a cannon in his living room. You could see it through the window. And one day I asked him about it. I said, "Hey, I see you got a cannon there in the living room. What's that about?" And he says that he's a Civil War enactor. And I'm like, I've never heard that before. I've always heard reenactor. And he went on this long dissertation about how they refight the battles and then they fix them. And I'm like, okay, how do you fix them? You do know we're not going to refight the exact same battles. We've got different guns now. And it was just this weird conversation. And it ended when I finally asked him, I said, "So what side do you dress up as?" Which was probably the wrong way to phrase it. And I admit that I was being a little snarky. And he gave me this really weird kind of deliverance. "The only side that matters, boy." And I was like, well, this is not going well. At which point I asked him about the big X on the flagpole, and he told me that was the flag of the South. And I said, well, that's odd because I thought it was white because they surrendered. At which point he yelled an expletive at me, and we never spoke again. Oddly enough. And it's this kind of weird world that we live in, that there are some people who look back at that era and find something positive about it. And I don't know what it is. I wish someone would explain it. Was it the fact that there was that feeling of white supremacy? Was it the fact that if you were wealthy enough, you could own somebody? I'm not sure, because I don't see how that's a states' rights issue. I don't see how that's a freedom issue. What it is, it's the antithesis of freedom. You're taking someone else's freedom. But I guess, well, when you look at someone as 3/5 a person, I guess you can get by just about anything, can't you? So interesting. Good. I'm glad to see that that's down. Also, I don't give a rat's behind about John Wayne. I have no idea why he is someone that we look back on positively. He was just an actor. If Reagan wasn't president, he would have just been a really bad actor because he was a real bad president. So I'm in favor of taking their names off of all of that stuff and just calling it the post office. There's an idea, little utilitarian idea. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1983. That was the day that began a 3-year struggle by copper workers in Arizona. The contract for 13 unions in the mining towns that included Clifton and Morenci had expired. Many of the workers were Latino. The employer, Phelps Dodge, used every tactic they could to break the strike. The workers and their families were harassed, evicted from their homes, under constant police surveillance, and arrested. Even though the contract guaranteed continued medical benefits, the company stopped health care for those on strike. To make matters worse, the company brought in scabs to replace the striking miners. On August 19th, the governor of Arizona sent a massive military convoy, including tanks and helicopters, to the work sites. Despite this overwhelming show of force against them, the strikers persevered. The wives set up a free medical clinic and organized to provide food and other needs for the striking families. Soon they joined their husbands, fathers, and brothers on the picket lines. The women traveled to give speeches and raise money. Finally, after 3 long years of struggle, the workers in the mines, predominantly the scabs brought in by the company, voted to decertify the union. thus ending the strike. Barbara Kingsolver wrote a moving book on the struggle called Holding the Line: Women in the Great Arizona Mine Strike of 1983. In the preface of the book, she warns, "Watch your back, America. Take civil liberties for granted at your own risk. Trust in leaders who arrive into power by means of wealth and see who they protect when push comes to shove. What happened in Arizona could happen again, and it will, somewhere to someone. It will happen again and again if we do not open our eyes and believe what we see." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Columbia University, their researchers have come out with a number. They said if the CARES Act had not passed, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, had that not passed, that gave Americans $1,200 and increased unemployment benefits by $600 a week, that we would have had 12 million additional people plunge into poverty. Now, you're over 13% unemployed, and we're heading towards, it's coming. We're heading towards a tsunami of foreclosures and of people being evicted from their homes. And like I said at the beginning, we're not seeing this administration really doing anything yet. They said, I guess it was through May that they had stopped foreclosures. You go, but that first month isn't really the problem. It's the summer. It's going into the fall. There needs to be a comprehensive plan that's going to help us for months to come. This is not going away. And what's interesting is, I've had conversations with people who never thought they'd be unemployed. They work in the restaurant industry, and the restaurant industry is just devastated because you've basically cut the potential business in half by having the social distancing. And you're having, fewer tables and less turnover, and it's not good. And those people who are used to bringing home, $500 a week are now bringing home $300 a week. And they're not getting that $600 extra into their paychecks to help them make up the difference. And this is where I come back to, we need to have something of a guaranteed minimum income. It just seems that's a minimum at this moment. Just my thought. Interesting little tidbit someone sent me. I used to work for a trucking company that evidently they've got a $700 million loan from the Treasury Department, and this company, they do a lot of moving of military stuff. They do a lot of work for the federal government, but $700 million loan to a company that they're saying was only worth $70 million. Okay. I'm thrilled for the people who work there. I've got a lot of friends who still work for YRC worldwide. And this is going to help them stay in business. This is going to help them have good wage jobs with solid union benefits. I am thrilled that it's being used to help them in this moment. The question is when do we help others? When do we help the small businesses? Now, what I love about this is the federal government has an equity stake in the company, about 30%. And when things turn around and this company turns around, we may get our money back. And this is what I said from the start. We should be buying up shares. We shouldn't be giving these companies anything. Buy your shares, and at some point down the road, we're going to sell them back to you. No handouts. No welfare for corporate America. Sorry. It seems pretty reasonable and pretty simple to me. But on the other side, it would sure be nice if we took the kind of money that we're throwing at this company, which, like I said, for the people who work there, I'm all in favor of it. Good for them. This is going to help them stay in business. But what about everybody else? What about the people who they're struggling to get by and their jobs aren't coming back? And you have a Republican Party who has come out and said They're not going to renew the $600. They're just not. Now, fortunately, this is an election year. Trump is going to want to do something, and he has said that he's not against the idea of another stimulus. I got to imagine his advisors are saying, you better come out with something big and bold, something that's going to really get people's attention and get them back on your side. That's the only plus that we have. But it'll be interesting to see what the next couple of days bring, because look, the end of the month, it all stops. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Are you collecting the unemployment? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share your thoughts. Quick break, right back.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
While our present president's moral character seems stuck somewhere between boorish and brutish, it's only fair to note that he also has an aesthetic dimension. This surprising side of Trump popped out several days after the Charlottesville attacks by raging white supremacists. In a presidential tweet, he said, "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart." Yes, very sad to see a resurfacing of raw bigotry ripping so viciously into America's historic attempts to create a culture of mutual respect and unity in a nation of extraordinary diversity. E pluribus unum, as our national maxim puts it. Oh, wait, that's not what Donald meant. Rather than criticizing those who are out to rip apart the American culture's big idea of egalitarianism, this was just more babble from the boorish Trump. He was actually advocating the continued presence of statues of Confederate champions of racism, pieces of bronze and granite that publicly celebrate America's shameful period of slavery, secession, and white supremacy. The KKK thugs invaded Charlottesville in violent objection to the city's planned removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee, who led the Southern States War against the USA so they could keep enslaving African Americans. Trump's lament, then, was not about the attack on America's humanitarian ideals, but merely about, quote, the removal of our beautiful statues. Apparently, it never occurred to him that most Americans do not consider those statues either beautiful or ours. Ironically, Robert E. Lee himself opposed erecting Confederate statues across the South. Quote, "I think it wiser not to keep open the sores of war," he said, "but instead to obliterate the marks of civil strife." This is Jim Hightower saying, we could use a leader with such wisdom today when bigots feel newly empowered to incite civil strife across our nation.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I was reading a Fox News story today that cited Hoover Institute senior fellow Thomas Sowell. Sowell claims that the left is going to cripple charter schools because they're so well organized. And as I said yesterday, I don't think the charter school people really have much to fear of the left because they're kind of disorganized. They should really be afraid of the right. Because as you saw yesterday, we talked about the Supreme Court that basically now said that if you're going to give taxpayer dollars to private schools, you got to give it to religious schools. And look, this is a huge win for those school choice people, because it's really what it is. It's about getting taxpayer dollars into the hands of these religious schools and these religious institutions. That's when the charter schools are going to take it, because to be honest, they're not doing all that great. I'm here to share some thoughts on where we are as a country with the charter schools. He's got a piece out, Credo's new study, Biased Against Public Schools. Credo, the Center for Research on Education Outcomes. Again, another one of these groups pushing the charter schools, but it's written by Thomas Ulican. Thomas, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, how you doing?
I'm good. So walk me through this. What's this study and the bias against public schools?
Well, let's go back to the beginning of Credo. Credo was established by a guy named Eric Hanasek and his now wife, Mackie Raymond. And so they were at the University of Rochester, a small private university in New York. Hanasek actually went to the Air Force Academy, and then from the Air Force Academy, somehow he went straight to MIT and did a doctorate in economics.
Impressive.
They were kind of like nowhere. And then in 1981, Hanasek wrote a paper claiming that more money for education wasn't going to fix things, that better educated teachers with more training wasn't going to help schools, and putting more money into schools and smaller class sizes wasn't going to help. Well, it's kind of malarkey, but people like the Walton family got excited when they saw that paper, and that put him on the radar screen of the conservative movement.
Right. So if I can stop you for a second, if better trained teachers, if better resource classrooms, if smaller class sizes, if better better facilities aren't the answer, what does he claim the answer is then?
He didn't really claim what the answer was, but he's very much working on privatizing the system. That's kind of he became kind of the go-to every time there was a lawsuit or about schools not getting their fair share of money. He became kind of the go-to economist the right would pull in to testify. Then in 1990, he and his wife, in 1989, started Credo at University of Rochester. The next year, they were given they transferred to the Hoover Institute, which is, of course, a very right-leaning organization, and they established Credo at the Hoover Institution, which gave them a lot of access to money from people like the New Schools Venture Fund and the anti-union groups that were fighting the teachers' unions. And so that's where Credo got there. And so their latest study, they exclusively study charter schools, and all they study is test scores.
Right.
That's all they care about are test scores in charter schools. Their latest study is called the City. I think it's called the City Study, and it's basically the 10 cities that what's his name, John Arnold, and the CEO of Netflix have established this company called the City Fund, and they're paying to have this study done on 10 cities that they're actually putting a lot of money into trying to create what they call a portfolio district model in all these cities. Right.
They're the ones that are heavily privatized. Ones with lots of private equity going into them and all of that.
Yeah, and so they've given a lot of money to Credo to do these studies. Well, the studies are actually set up so they're not super biased. They're just enough biased to show that charter schools are just a little better.
Okay, because obviously the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, this Credo place there, but didn't Stanford do the study on this that say that basically charter schools don't do any better?
Oh, Credo did that study.
Oh, okay.
That was Credo's study, but then then they gave a lot of guidance to charter schools about how to improve, and now they're saying that that charter schools are now the deal, that they are much better. Well, one of the things they do is they only will look at compare schools that have students that have transferred to charter schools. So if you have a school that no students are transferring to charter schools, you can't be in the Credo study or compared with the charter schools. So the best public schools are left out of their studies.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
This is one of those moments, though, because I look at someone like Thomas Sowell, who, like I said today, came out and said that, the left's trying to kill the charter schools. And I come back to this, it's all about the money for me. When I look at, maybe there are some people who view this as an opportunity to better educate students. I just haven't found that to be the reality. I find this as Education Incorporated, how they're going to, suck taxpayer dollars out of the classroom and put it into their pockets. And I see this Supreme Court decision yesterday that says that, if you're going to give private schools money, you got to give them to religious schools. And I just see this as the, now, they're going to let charters go off to die, and everything's now going to become a private religious school.
Well, that's kind of what they'd like. But one of the things that these people that really want to put all this money into religion, they better be careful, because one of the things, when you start putting government money into religion, the government's going to want control. They're going to want rules.
Yeah, but and again, I haven't read the full decision from the Supreme Court, but it didn't appear that was in that decision.
Oh no, that was a very narrow decision that said that if you give any money to a private school, then religious schools have to be able to get money also in religious private schools.
Right.
And so it was a very narrow, and that was. And it was a kind of a strange decision. It really was. But back to Thomas Sowell, the reason he's talking, he's selling his book. He just put out a book. I don't remember the name of it, but that's the only reason that he's making any kind of news is he's out there trying to hawk his book.
Yeah, and get people all worked up. Now, I look at these charter schools as, the latest, of the great solutions to solve our problems that haven't. And it's always been my view that, if, basically the antithesis of the argument that the guy who started this credo makes is, I think you need to pour more resources into these schools. I think you need to have more wraparound services. You need to have more small classes, more technology, better accommodations, instead of, starving the beast and saying, well, it's just, you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Well, this whole charter school idea is really just a neoliberal construct saying that anything the government does, business can do better. And, and that was Chris Whittles, and when he was trying to do the private Edison school. And the problem they have is they can never actually compete with public schools. Even the best private schools don't do well when tested against public schools if you set up some kind of adjustments for economics.
And it comes back to that, doesn't it? It still comes back down to the dollars and cents.
The testing really comes down to dollars and cents, too. It's like, depending on where the testing is almost useless. It really doesn't tell you anything about the quality of the school. It tells you about what the financial condition of the parents are. And that's just it. It doesn't tell you anything more. That's the only testing correlation that has a high R value is the economic condition of the parents.
Right. So, as I've been saying for a long time, if you want to change those test scores, we need to change the society. We need to not just educate the children, but also go back, educate parents. There should be, the school should be the center of the community, not just for the child, but for the whole family.
Well, this test score thing, of course, the charter school industry really uses the test scores because that's how they try to prove that they're better. And so you have these no excuses charter schools who do nothing but test prep.
Right.
And schools like Idea Public Schools down in Texas, that large chain, Betsy DeVos and Arne Duncan between them have given that chain $600 million. I mean, boy, wouldn't that be nice if they put that kind of money in public school?
Yeah.
The public schools are where 90% of students in America go. That's the system that needs to be protected and made whole
and invested in. I mean, because every dollar you take out of the local public school and put into these charter schools is a dollar that's not in that public school.
Well, not only that, you're leaving behind stranded costs. For every dollar you take out, there's like a 40% stranded cost left over for the district to take care of. Plus, the districts end up having to do some administrative functions for the charters in their area.
Not to mention transportation and all the other stuff that goes along with it as well.
Yeah, and then fundamentally what you have is you have a dual system that the public is paying for with the charters. Well, a dual system is just inefficient. You're paying double for the same thing.
Right, but again, it goes back to what you were saying. The neoliberal view is that private industry can do it better, and then there's this idea of, well, they'll compete, and this isn't one of those places where you're going to see that kind of competition.
Well, it's kind of like competing in healthcare. Sure, we can compete, but who's going to go look for the person that's got the best credentials when they're hunting for an emergency room that's closest?
Yeah, I always say that, I'm not going to be speed dialing the local hospitals looking for who's going to take my coupon if I have a heart attack.
Yeah, there are certain things. Prisons, schools, and healthcare should not be privatized.
I'm right there with you. So last question I've got for you, and looking at this study, what's the bottom line for people to take away from this?
Well, the bottom line is that there's this whole industry of organization, Credo being one of them, the New Schools Venture Fund, another one, that are all designed to sell the charter industry. And they're getting...
And along the way, put a lot of money in their pocket, and to copyright, and to what's the word I'm looking for?
Their salaries are tremendous.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's amazing how much those people are making.
And you go back to the original intent of this was to be able to share best practices, and to learn and experiment with different ways of doing things, and then to share them, not to copyright them, patent them, and then sell them back as proprietary.
Well, back in the late 90s, there were a lot of people all over the United States, especially in the early 2000s when we got No Child Left Behind. They wanted to go out and start charter schools so they could actually teach like they knew you needed to teach instead of teaching to a test. And so some of those charter schools they started were pretty good.
Right.
There were some really good ideas. But now we have CMOs, these charter management organizations. They're just a giant corporate entity that's only in it for profit.
Yeah. Well, the hope is that we wake up and we turn the corner and go in the right direction. But Thomas, I appreciate the time and the piece. I hope folks will take a look at it. Credo's new study, Biased Against Public Schools. We'll get links out on how folks can take a look at it.
By the way, Rick, last time I talked to you, I told you school was going to be out forever.
Yeah, and that, again, I'm worried about that.
I don't think we're going to be able to open in September, but they're going to try.
Yeah, some places are going to try. And that's going to cause a whole nother crisis of childcare and all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, we somehow need to quit avoiding science and come together in some kind of a unified action as communities and solve these problems.
Yeah, maybe a better education system would do that for us.
Well, we have a good education system. Just quit screwing with it.
There you go. That's the final word. Thomas, I appreciate it. Great stuff.
Thanks a lot, Rick.
I like it. We got a great system. Just quit. I would have used a different word, but he's an educator. There you go. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2 on On this day in labor history, the year was 1929. That was the day 1,800 streetcar drivers and motormen walked off the job at New Orleans Public Service. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees, Division 194, had been in contract negotiations for months. They demanded higher wages, a closed shop, and an end to arbitrary discharges. The company was looking to bust the Amalgamated with the creation of a company union. For the first few days, the strike was quiet. But then, on July 5th, the company brought in strikebreakers. 10,000 union members and their supporters gathered to stop scab service. The company attempted to run a lone streetcar down Canal Street. Immediately, it was pelted with bricks and stones. The scab driver bailed. Another 4 cars attempted to leave the car barn. Pitched battles raged for hours with police and scabs. 2 union men were shot and killed by scabs and hundreds more injured. Trade unions throughout the city threatened a general strike. The strike raged on for 2 months. Throughout the summer, trolleys were burned to the ground, tracks destroyed, switches cemented in place. As the weeks wore on, conditions became more desperate. That's when Clovis and Beanie Martin, former Division 194 conductors, decided to help out. They had since left public transit to open the Martin Brothers coffee stand and restaurant. They declared to their former union brothers, quote, "We are with you, heart and soul. We are with you till hell freezes over." They offered free supersized sandwiches for the poor boys. The strikers would eventually win some of their demands. The sandwiches would become a standard in New Orleans cuisine, better known as the Po' Boy. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the reality, when I look at this, we've talked about charter schools for a long time, and for me, it's the same thing. And I think Thomas Hewlett hit on it perfectly. Education comes down to your zip code. How you do on these standardized tests comes down to socioeconomics more than it comes down to who's standing at the front of the classroom. And because there's so much else that goes on, and I go back to my childhood. I go back to, where I grew up. And, I was just having this conversation with my wife the other day where, I was fortunate that I went to a Catholic school at a time when Cleveland was in just chaos educationally. They were shipping kids all over the city on buses to get this racial mix that they attempted to achieve. And I guess on a certain level, you could go, well, it was a laudable goal. But what it did is it caused a lot of chaos. And it took poor kids from one area of the city and moved them to poor areas on the other side of the city. And the educational opportunities were so much less. The idea of participating in extracurricular activities completely out the window. And that community of school was broken. And I remember at the time, white families, black families, everybody protested against, shipping kids all around the city. And one of the arguments I remember back then, and again, I'm a young kid, 8, 9 years old. The argument that I remember that made the most sense even then was just redrawing the school district, just changing the boundaries. That's how you do it. Let kids walk to school, but just change the boundaries at which they were. And because, here's my reality. I was fortunate. I was a white kid. And, and looking back on this, and especially in this moment, re-examining, the privilege that I've had, even the fact that I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and we were just as poor as everyone else. At the end of the month, we didn't have food. There were no jobs. We weren't on the bus line. All of that stuff. I look back on it now and go, my mother was able to clean the rectory and was able to, sweep the church and to do odd jobs to pay my tuition. There were no black kids in my school. And it's one of those things that, now look, the reality is I don't know how many black Catholics there are. Most of my friends who were black, they were Baptist, which was something completely different. But I had the opportunity to go to a Catholic school and got a really good education, even in the environment that I was in. Now, the difference was I learned to read and write and do all of those things before I went to school. My mother was very, very diligent and very iron fisted, and education was always one of those things that was front and foremost. Whereas some of my friends' parents, some of them couldn't read, some of them fell through the cracks early, and it was this whole situation. And then you look at the local public school, which was literally crumbling, and they eventually tore it down. By the time I was in like third grade, it was just chaos. Where if you would have thrown some resources in, if you would have invested in that community and really invested, secondary learning classes for parents and wraparound services for mental health and alcohol and drug abuse and all of those things, you could have changed the community. And that's really hard work, which is why we're never going to do it. It takes a lot of resource, a lot of time, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, oh my gosh, this year we did so fantastic on the test. Look what we were able to, to wring out of these kids. Instead of changing hearts and minds and ideas, we're still looking for the quick fix. And in those communities, I just don't believe it's possible. And you could go, well, that's racist. No, I'm talking about poor people. If anything, it's the only color to me, I've said this before, the only color to me that matters is green. Because as Thomas pointed out, you can tell the socioeconomics of a child based on their test scores. If their parents live in a good GA, a good address, probably going to do pretty well on the tests. If you have a lot of poverty, I mean, the other thing I've seen is you could tell the test scores by the school lunch programs. How many kids are getting free milk and free school lunches? That has a huge impact on the tests as well. I just think there's a better way of doing this without taking those dollars and giving them to the hands of profiteers. As I've said a million times from the beginning, the idea of the charter schools wasn't a bad one. We're going to try and do things differently. We're going to share best practices. Because not every kid learns the same. I personally, I'm an experiential learner. If I can get my hands on it, I can figure it out. Not everyone's like that. So the idea of trying things differently and then sharing them, I'm in favor of. But when you then take that stuff that our tax dollars built, patent it, and then sell it back to us, I have a problem with that. And that's what this system has turned into. Any good that the charter school movement could have done, I think is gone. Now, as Thomas said, there are some that do really well. And as the study that I've read said, that most charter schools do exactly the same as the local public schools. Some do worse, a handful do better. So the question is, and again, take into account, these charter schools have the opportunity to throw kids out of school. They cream the best of the best out of the public schools. They have motivated parents. In fact, if you read some of the mandates on parents with, so many hours a week that they have to volunteer in the classroom and so many hours a week that they have to give towards, verifiable, this time or that time. And if the kid acts up, they toss them out. Or more likely, if they don't do well on the test, they get thrown out. And they're still not doing any better. It's kind of amazing to me. Which is why you don't see a lot of charter schools propping up in well-to-do areas. You just don't. This is one of those things that they've sold poor communities. Hey, you're getting something. Hey, this is special. This is really good. See, it's got new doors. Because we haven't invested in the infrastructure of the local schools. So anything's better than what they had. And these communities feel that they've now got something and they need to hold on to it and they need to fight for even though it's no better than what they had. I mean, it's really a great bait and switch. But that's corporate America for you. Or, as I say, Education Incorporated. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit me with all of your charters are great arguments. I love to see those. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
America is no longer energy dependent. We are now energy dominant.
Dominant U.S. fracking pioneer Chesapeake Energy files for bankruptcy.
BP has wiped $17.5 billion off the value of its assets.
BP warns investors of a future with less oil. Sorry, endangered species, U.S. Supreme Court won't stop Trump's border wall for you. Plus,
federal flood maps have underestimated the risk to nearly 15 million homes across the U.S.
Flood risks to U.S. homes are far higher than previously estimated.
All of those bad estimates and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I called Saudi Arabia, and believe it or not, I called Mexico, and we got them to do the right thing, and we have our energy back to up almost $40 a barrel, meaning you have an energy business again.
Meaning you yutzes are plotting for higher gas prices. Well done. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, while everyone is worried about the COVID crisis, you, I hope, are keeping your eyes on our climate crisis.
Oh, indeed. And first up, millions more homes are at risk of flooding than previously known. That's according to a new analysis by the First Street Foundation, a nonprofit research group that has compiled the most comprehensive data yet of the country's growing vulnerability to flooding due to man-made climate change. The analysis found that nearly 15 million properties, that's 70% more than are currently included in FEMA's outdated flood hazard maps, are actually at significant risk of flooding. And the analysis found that as climate change accelerates, millions more property owners will see their flood risk grow by 2050 within the life of a 30-year mortgage signed today. That will have substantial impacts on the mortgage market and the insurance market.
So if I go out to buy a house and I check the FEMA maps to see where my house is as far as flood risk, I'm going to get just terrible, wrong information?
Possibly. You can look up your area's risk with this new data tool. We have the links at our website, greennews.bradblog.com. Bad news for endangered species along the U.S. southern border with Mexico. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday declined to hear a suit brought by environmental and conservation organizations challenging the Trump administration's decision to waive more than 40 major environmental laws as unconstitutional in order to speed up construction of Trump's border wall. The court let stand the Department of Homeland Security's waivers of the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, and a host of major laws and regulations that the groups say violate the Constitution's separation of powers.
You know, Supreme Court, there's going to be a Democratic president at some point, and that Democratic president is going to get to do whatever he or she wants to do because you've given away all the power.
Also in the courts, Washington, D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine has filed a lawsuit against 4 oil majors for violating the district's consumer protection laws. Coming just a day after Minnesota filed a similar suit, the district's lawsuit contends that BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Royal Dutch Shell have known since the 1950s that their product caused dangerous climate change, but launched public relations campaigns to manufacture doubt about man-made climate change to preserve their profits. The lawsuit seeks civil penalties and financial relief for district residents and for the oil companies to stop their disingenuous PR campaigns that tout natural gas, which also contributes significantly to the climate crisis.
Oh, so what? Now, even fraud is illegal?
A reckoning for a fracking pioneer. In the wake of the crash in oil and gas prices, Chesapeake Energy, a leader in aggressively launching fracking operations across the U.S. over the last decade, has declared bankruptcy with $9 billion in debt. Chesapeake, famous for making risky bets, previously was the king of the fracking industry and its rickety business model, acquiring a mountain of debt to rapidly expand its operations, which in turn contributed to the glut of supply that kept natural gas prices and profits unsustainably low.
So fracking sad.
And then the coronavirus hit and crushed demand. Finally, British Petroleum has announced that it expects to wipe more than $17 billion off the value of its assets and is cutting its long-term forecasts for oil and gas prices. BP is projecting that the coronavirus shutdowns will cast a lasting effect on energy demand. Bloomberg News reports that BP's announcement, quote, baldly acknowledges that the major hydrocarbon producers are sitting on oil fields that will never be developed because the pandemic has curbed energy demand and increased the desire for renewables within the supply mix.
We told you months ago to sell off those oil stocks. Did you listen? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a new super PAC with a Facebook page and probably a lot of money popping up today. Hundreds, they're saying, according to Reuters, hundreds of officials who worked for President George W. Bush, they have begun 43 alumni for Biden. Evidently, a bunch of these Republicans not happy with Donald Trump, and they are coming together to, well, raise some money and have a Facebook page. And also maybe try and reclaim the soul of their party. Anyway, here share some thoughts on the top news of the day. Our good friend Bob Ney, political analyst, former congressman from Ohio, and good friend of the program. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So what do you think? 43 alumni for Biden.
Right. Now, there's a couple of PACs worth mentioning. I think this one obviously, is one. It was reported, as you said, to Reuters. And Christopher Purcell, who worked for the communications office in the White House during the Bush administration, was the one quoted today. And he's saying about 200 former officials are, with this. And there's another PAC, and it's run by Matt Borges, who was the Ohio Republican chairman. He's been now censured and removed as what do you call it? You're not chairman anymore, but you're kind of an honorific title, right?
Emeritus.
Yeah, emeritus. Yeah, and they removed him by a vote. The Ohio Republican Party did this week. He had controversy during the election because his wife, I think, either told him he couldn't put a Trump sign in his yard or she put a Clinton sign, one of the two, and that erupted here in Ohio, last time. But he has a significant PAC because they are going to be raising a lot of money and putting ads specifically, I think, on the TV side of it. And, of course, this PAC with the 43 is going to be doing a lot. The PAC run by Matt Borges is called Right Side PAC. And that's going to be a group of Republicans that feel that Donald Trump, this is a quote, is an existential threat to the country and his party, which is pretty stern,
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. And, the thing is there's so much money. It seems like there's so many of these super PACs setting up. And, I look at the second quarter, the RNC and the Trump campaign brought in almost $300 million.
Right. And they have money. And I was just thinking today, look, the numbers are in Biden's favor, et cetera. Again, anybody who lets their guard down doesn't know politics. But I was also thinking that this little conspiracy part of my brain that the corporate media world, the money people are going to say, well, okay, now this is a little lopsided. Let's make it a tiny bit closer so everybody has to spend more money. That's my little conspiracy in the back part of my brain
I
there.
don't know that it's a conspiracy because, everyone loves a horse race. You want to keep people engaged. You want to keep people spending money. Those TV ads, not cheap. I don't see a conspiracy there.
Right. I mean, it's like I said, the corporate media world, which can, do a lot to feather its own nest.
Yeah.
But this is not a good sign for the president. Look, anybody in the Republican side that tries to say, this is okay, he's taking on the establishment. It's not okay. In the past, you would all, and look, I had this Democrats for nay when I was running, and there were legitimate people that put their name there, right?
Right.
But it wasn't fueled with a ton of money. It was just people that wanted to do it. Union workers for nay. I had plenty of, of course I had union endorsements too. So, you appreciated those. This one, though, is so much different because this isn't just where you find one or two people at the presidential level and, there for Biden. These are a lot of names and a lot of money, and there's a lot behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading through John Bolton's book, and and basically the what I'm getting from it is everything that we've been talking about for the last three and a half years is absolutely true. The guy has no interest whatsoever. Everything that he gets policy wise, he gets from Fox News, and there's not much going on between the ears. So it's not surprising to me when I saw the USA Today Suffolk poll today that said 2/3 of the country, 67%, think Biden has the right experience to be president, while only 37% think that Donald Trump, who is president, has the right experience to be president.
Yes, that, and also, I mean, look, there's going to be debates, and I was just imagining this scenario, right, where the one candidate, you could either use name Trump or Biden, but the one candidate says, you're senile, and the other candidate says, no, you're senile. So you've got these types of things that people are actually talking about because both sides are calling both candidates this, But I think once people also take a look at Joe Biden, I mean, look, Joe Biden's a nice guy.
Yeah.
I worked with Joe Biden. I mean, he really is a very nice person, and that doesn't mean he's a pushover. But I think there's going to be a certain amount of anxiety. People are tired of things. They're tired of a lot of conflict. And unless Biden really kind of latches onto some things he shouldn't latch onto, I think people are going to kind of say, I'm tired.
Yeah,
I don't want to fight no more.
No, and look, the economy's, we haven't had the worst part of what's coming yet. I think once the extra $600 goes away from the feds, and I think once some of the stimulus money goes away, we're going to see how painful things are going to be because the job numbers don't look good.
Well, the job numbers, you're right, they aren't good, and what's behind the job numbers is not hot at all. The private data, the White House is looking at it. June's unemployment rate's going to be released, in the morning, and they're not going to be good. And again, what's behind it, is not going to be good. But I was thinking to myself today, when I read that story, that I will bet you that whatever the House and Senate send over to the president, he will sign it of an additional stimulus package. I bet he will. I mean, there won't be any, I'm going to, hold down the budget, and I think he'll sign anything.
I think he has to. I think it's got to be something big. I think it's got to be something, really bold, and I think it's got to be something that's really going to help people.
Well, yes, and you just said the right word, people. Look, they're trying to renew the business money again, and they may and they may not. I don't know, but let's face it, with rising numbers, if things get set backwards, et cetera, then they're going to have to do something. And Ohio, just today, is talking about 2 days a week school instead of 5, which can become a catastrophic nightmare for a lot of families. And you got to, you have to have some daycare, you have to have some money. What are you going to do? You're going to quit your job, or, you have to have some resources. So I think the stimulus package, if they're smart, the system, they're going to gear it towards people. Period. That's where it's got to come into.
No, I said this from the start, Bob. I don't think corporate America should have gotten a dime. I think I have a fairly wealthy uncle who explains his view of business as I can give you all the money and eventually I'm going to get it back from you. because you're going to buy my stuff. I'm going to get it. It's going to rise up. So my view has always been, why are we giving him money when he's going to get it from me anyway by providing the services that I need?
Well, yes, and also, like, for example, some of the restaurant chains that got money, Ruth Chris, and of course they reversed, but still, when they got money and they still are going to lay people off, and if we digress on all of this, and it gets worse and the numbers jump, they're still going to, again, lay people off. So why in the first place would they get money? It's not going to trickle down through the system, and if they're in trouble, they'll hold out, and they'll either collapse or they'll come back when things get better.
Right.
But giving them money did not keep anyone employed.
No, and that's this idea of the benevolent employer. I'm sorry, it's just not there.
Right.
And we don't have a system like the Germans have to ensure that they do. I mean, that's the perfect world. The perfect world would have been keep everybody collecting their same paycheck, the money funneling through employers, keep their health care benefits, keep all of that stuff just the way it is, and government, funnel that money to those companies and have a system for that. We're just not set up for that.
Well, we're not. And you just mentioned the buzzword, too, health care. When this comes before the Supreme Court in the fall, before the election, the president had better hope that what he wants does not happen with the American, Health Care Act, the ACA, being undone by the Supreme Court. If that happens, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, because people can complain all they want and they couldn't keep their health care, on and on and on. Go ahead in September and lose your health care across this country and see what happens.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, as Trump has been president, the ACA has gotten a lot more popular. In fact, just today I saw the story that Oklahoma actually approved Medicaid expansion at the ballot box. A red state saying, we want this, we need this, and they actually passed it at the ballot box.
Well, and it helps because I have a friend of mine who is very sick at this point in time, and she's in Florida. And when she called me to tell me what's going on, seeking some advice, I said, well, what do you mean your medicine is going to cost you this much? And, well, they didn't buy into the expansion in Florida. Now, if she was up in Ohio, her life would be a lot better, but, they didn't buy into the expansion. So you're seeing states now, like you just mentioned, that are saying, wow, we've got to do something. And again, if the whole system's turned upside down and eliminated, the bill may have had flaws. I never liked the fact it didn't go after pharmaceuticals, et cetera. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And let's face it, the Senate was supposed to do something with it. The president was supposed to do something with it. They didn't. So people shouldn't hold on to false hopes that somehow magically this disappears and, that we can somehow find ways to keep people on health care.
No, you're right, especially because the miracle drug that they're touting, this remdesivir, I think it's called, they're saying like $3,200 for the treatment.
Right. Of course. There's that's the other thing. Somebody needs to get the guts to say, no, this isn't going, we're going to have it, but we're not going to have it at $3,200 a clip.
No, I said that the other day, and I said, that's just completely outrageous. And, someone tweeted to me, well, they have the right to set the price where they want. And I'm going, yeah, but we gave them $70 million to develop that drug. We paid for the R&D. Right. We paid for that to be developed.
Right. And of course, if the Hep C treatment, the cure, is $55,000 here, it's $500 in India, because that's what the market bears. So the same pharmaceutical companies sell that in India at $500. I'm thankful for the Indians doing that, getting that. But over here, it's $55,000 because we let them do that. And they use our money over here to develop it and things, and then they do as they please according to the markets. Well, we should have a break too. I don't mind another country has a break, but so should we.
No, I'm right there with you. And look, as this virus, as more and more people are going to get it, and the numbers are spiking every day, we're going to need those treatments. And, I look at, I don't know, have you seen this thing in New York and Connecticut, New Jersey?
Yes.
How they're trying to do travel bans? I guess like 16, 17 states that they're saying that if you come to New York, you have to quarantine. My first thought is, how do you enforce that?
Well, I saw it, and you've got Alabama, you got California, Florida, et cetera, 16 of the states, Tennessee's in there too, Utah, Texas. And I thought to myself, okay, if you're traveling to a New York airport or a New Jersey airport, does that count? How do you do that? Do you stop cars on the way in? Do you just kind of make examples of a couple of people and then everybody gets afraid? I understand, what they're saying, but how on earth would you enforce it?
Yeah, but when I looked at the numbers, they're talking like $10,000 per occurrence. I mean, these are some pretty draconian fines.
Sure.
I guess, look, you want a big shock number there so people go, oh, I don't want to get caught. But, do they make an example out of a couple of people?
Well, and we can do some scenarios here too. You have to travel to New York for some reason, and then you get a phone call, and somebody is dying back home. What do you do? Do you go back? Do you do quarantine? There's a lot of scenarios there that I guess it would depend on who they find and arrest. If they do the wrong fine on someone's grandma, then it might not go down as well.
Yeah, crazy. And finally, Colorado. What's going on in Colorado? The QAnon candidate upset the 5-term incumbent.
Right. That was the candidate not supported by the president.
Right.
And she ran on a right-wing platform, and he'd been in 10 years, right?
Yeah, he'd been around a while. And this woman was just flat out crazy.
Well, she just, I think ran on probably voter dissatisfaction. I'm sure she blamed him for everything under the sun, that he didn't do things and that he wasn't, conservative enough. And, she was able to pick him off. Now, I don't know what that'll do for the general.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this election turns out and what we end up with in 2021. But as always, I'm sure you'll be here to analyze and share your expertise with us. As always, Bob, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1922. That was the day that railroad workers across the United States walked off the job. During World War I, the railroads had been nationalized by President Woodrow Wilson. Seen as a vital cog of the war machine, the railroads were to be kept running no matter what. Because they were essential to the war effort, this gave railroad workers leverage. They won the 8-hour workday and improved working conditions. But when the war ended, railroads went back under private control. The seat at the table with management quickly was pulled out from under labor. The private owners eliminated Sunday and holiday overtime pay. Then wages were slashed for many railroad workers. The railroad companies promised the Big Four unions that no further cuts were coming. These included the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers, the Brotherhood of Firemen and Engineermen, the Order of Railroad Conductors, and the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen. A strike vote was held across the industry. The Big Four voted not to strike, but the other unions decided to walk off the job. The response by the companies and the government was swift and brutal. A federal court issued an injunction against the strikers. They were prohibited from even talking about the strike to the press. Thousands of company gun thugs and National Guard troops were mobilized against the strikers. 10 workers were killed. With both guns and the courts lined up against them, the railroad workers did not stand much of a chance. The strike was defeated. The failed strike showed the importance of building worker solidarity across job type if labor had any hope of standing up to the bosses. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, as Anthony Fauci turns, every day there's something new. Evidently, the good doctor said today that mixed messaging is what sent our response back. He said we have to admit it that that mixed messaging in the beginning, even though it was well meant to allow masks to be available to healthcare workers, that was detrimental in getting the message across. He said, no doubt about it. And here's the thing, my wife just went to the doctor today, and she came home with a sheet, talking about mask use. And according to what she told me, it said you don't have to wear a mask unless you're, you have issues, and it's per the CDC. Obviously it's an old document, but it laid out what we had known from the what they had said from the beginning. You only if you have, if you're vulnerable to the disease, just social distancing, all that stuff. And now we're, again, the mixed messaging of now you've got the governor of Pennsylvania saying you walk outside, you better have a mask on. Now here again, I don't know how you're going to enforce that with all the nitwits and dimwits that are around. And as I read the order, there's a cop-out clause because it does go through and say, well, in certain circumstances, you don't have to wear a mask. People who have medical conditions, respiratory issues, mental health or disability problems, anyone who it would create an unsafe condition, whether they're, operating equipment or something, individuals who would be unable to remove a mask without assistance, individuals who are less than 2 years old, individuals who are communicating or seeking to communicate with someone with a hearing impairment or other disability. And then they hit the main line. Individuals are not required to show documentation that exceptions apply. And you go, so you just threw the whole thing out because every one of these morons with their little cards, and I'm sure we've all seen the little cards that say, I don't have to wear a mask, I have a condition, and you can't ask me. And it's $150,000 if you do, and you just want to smack them. You now know that that's going to be their, I have a condition. And it's one of these moments where you go, maybe as a society, we should be coming up with something better than the mask by now, something that's a little more breathable, something that's, because this is going to be with us a while. Maybe some good entrepreneur can figure out how to make a sealable mask that's going to help, maybe not be right on your face, maybe, some shields kind of stuff to where you can talk to people and actually see their lips. You would think in the United States of America, the entrepreneurial capital of the world, that we would be able to devise something better than just putting a rag over our face. You would think. I haven't seen it yet. And the hope is that at some point this happens, because if we could wear a Darth Vader helmet or something, maybe more people would take to it. If we made it look kind of cool and not as difficult to breathe, because my wife made these really incredible masks, and part of it was from the masksnow.org people, but they're really hard to breathe through. It's like 17 layers of fabric and just this massive, bulky, just this thing. Well, 3. Okay, she said 3. So, but it's just massive, bulky thing that you go, can't we think of something better? So this is where I'm at. I'm calling on the entrepreneurs. This is a way to make your million, making masks that's going to be a little more comfortable, that you can see through and talk to people and alleviate some of the, some of the whining that people make. Now, I still wear the thing, but make it a little easier. That's all I'm asking for. Use that. Go into the garage, tinker, do what you got to do. Whip out some light plexiglass, because evidently plexiglass, their stock is through the roof because it's having its moment in the sun, because there's now plexiglass everywhere. Which I asked from the beginning why that didn't happen all at the very start, but hey, there's an opportunity. But Fauci is not wrong. He's not wrong that the mixed messages that they gave at the beginning, so that they didn't have a stampede of people running to the Home Depot or to the local medical store buying everything up, is not turning around and biting them in the behind. Because, she went to the doctor and it was there. The same stuff that is now wrong. And look, you have to admit, hey, we did it for the right reason. It was the wrong thing. Wear the damn mask. Does that make sense? Seems reasonable to me. Now, I'm going to be interested to see what happens in Pennsylvania tomorrow. And again, it's the enforcement. I look through the order. I don't see an enforcement mechanism. I don't see a way to make people wear them, other than, as a society, maybe, the next time you see someone, you slap them upside the back of the head. I don't know. But there doesn't appear to be any enforcement to this, other than just being a decent person and looking out for your neighbor and caring about the other folks. That's where I'm going to leave that. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.